It's a good evening from the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. We are here with you at the Fireplace Conversations, joined by three gentlemen. And I'm really excited to do the last part of our conversation on the governance of natural resources in the context of triple bottom line accountability. And in the last two sessions, we dealt with people and profit, and today we focus on the planet. Wangari Maathai, it's a Kenyan environmental activist. He said, "We all share one planet and are one humanity. There is no escaping this reality." And today we really want to look into how we can reserve this planet, but especially Namibia in this context. So introducing my panelists, right across me I have Mr. Kenneth Wiseb, who holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Geography and Political Studies from the University of Namibia and a Master's degree in Environmental Management from the University of Free State in Bloemfontein, South Africa. He's been working for the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism since 2009 and has been responsible for providing scientific advice to Parks and Wildlife Management Department. In addition to that, he has been responsible for reviewing and advising on environmental impacts arising from developing projects, especially in protected areas and where species of high conservation value is concerned, and it's very relevant for our topic tonight. And on my right, is it my right, my left, I have Mr. Fabian Shanika. He has over 16 years of mining industry experience, having worked at four of Namibia's largest operations, namely Rossing Uranium, De Beers Marine, Namibia, Scorpion Zinc, and Namdeb in various technical and managerial roles. And he holds a B-Science honors in geophysics from the Leeds University, an MBA from the University of Stellenbosch, and he's a registered professional geologist. He is an executive committee member of the Namibia Green Hydrogen Association, and as RMB's sector lead for Namibia for mining and natural resources, Fabian had been actively involved in work that speaks to the ever-increasing close synergies between the mining and the transition energies industry. And lastly, across me again, I have Mr. Nelson Chelos, who is a geoscientist, a USA climate trained leader, a certified project manager, and he has over 8 years of environmental research, exploration, and mining consulting and business development experience. He is a founder of several business entities in Namibia and Africa, including Excel Dynamic Solutions, and his team members include geoscientists, environmentalists, data analysts, and project managers. And he's a founding and management member at the Minerals Africa Development Institution based in Uganda, and was responsible for the Research, Innovation, and Technology Division until 2021. Outside of business, he has interest in sustainability initiatives, climate change, youth empowerment, and leadership development in natural resources management and environmental health. And as a trained climate reality leader and country representative for 3 climate change and World Health Organizations, he spends time raising awareness about climate change and its solutions. And he's received actually a number of awards internationally, nationally, and regionally because of what he does. And if I were to go through that, we'd have to spend another 30 minutes. Trust me, he has lots of accolades. So to jump right into it, I'm actually going to start with you, and we're talking about the planet today, and I'm excited about this conversation. But I'm also thinking that we need for this conversation to make sense for the two conversations that we've heard before, which is the people and the profit aspects. And the conversation is just evolving. It's going on. And in fact, today, before I got here, I received an article, which I couldn't go through, unfortunately. And things have just been written and things have been said, and a lot is happening in the space of natural resources. It's such a critical topic that we're dealing with. And starting with you, as the ESG frameworks are rolling out, mainly as devised in the global north, are we as relatively industrialized countries not being asked to carry disproportionate and unfair responsibilities and costs to remedy global climate issues are our local E. Of course, the S and the G is important issues, not more important than the global context. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I send my greetings to our viewers as well. I want to start off by laying two fundamental aspects about me, just as a start before we get to the discussion and to your question.
Yeah.
One is, so in 2017, I listened to a gentleman who eventually became a friend, even though he's late. His name is Jim Rohn. He said something very deep, and he asked, so if you ask Vincia today to give you a list of why ESG and all these things are not happening in Namibia, she may give you a long list of reasons. And you can go through that list, but you get to the bottom of it and her name will be missing on that list. So he's fundamentally saying we are good at looking for reasons why things are not happening and never consider ourselves as part of the solution. That's one. So it changed my whole perspective about everything, and obviously it's gonna influence how I respond to some of your questions. The other thing is excited to be here and to speak to those aspects. I agreed to attend for one good reason, and that is because I have made a decision in 2020 that I will be left with 2020. I will be left with less than 10 years to retirement, and whatever I'm attending should be impactful. So as we speak, I only have 4 years left to my retirement.
Does that give us an indication of your age?
Hopefully not. Okay. But what I'm saying is I accepted this invitation because I understand the magnitude of it and what impact it would have, and it speaks to what I want to achieve before retirement. To your question, so this is a global discussion. And if you look at, I have had my issues with the whole triple bottom line discussion, because we are trying to balance Earth. I guess it's Earth. We are not being crazy like Elon Musk to speak about other planets yet. Earth, people, and profit as equal legs on this pot. And my view was always that no, it's planet that is the pot that needs legs, such as people, profit, and whatever else we can think of, because the planet is basically what is housing all of us. And we can only make profit if we are on planet Earth. We can only be concerned about people if we are on planet Earth. And one more important issue that is missing is that it's people, profit, planet, but we forget that the planet is made up of other components that are as equal as anything else. But to your question, is it fair that we are concerned about what the Northern Hemisphere is doing at the moment, and perhaps not paying attention to what is on the ground? The unfortunate thing about Earth, when you look at it, especially from a scientific perspective, is that it's one huge body. It doesn't have the lines that we have drawn as country borders, Namibia, South Africa, Africa, and so on. It's one big body whereby if anything happens, wherever it happens, it affects everyone. And my view is that instead of, pointing fingers to who is doing what and who is not doing what, who has contributed more to the issues we are facing, it should become a collective discussion where all of us are concerned, because most of the problems we are dealing with are actually not problems that we created, the ones who are discussing it here now. It's problems created sometime in the past by those who are no longer there. They can't give their views why they made certain decisions. And therefore, for us is to discuss things looking into the future. What would those who have discussions such as this say about how we were making decisions? Were they more localized, thinking Namibian, sub-Saharan, or were they more global in the planet context? And I wouldn't say let's focus on issues that UIS and Erongo and maybe South Africa. I would say whatever is happening regarding Earth concerns everyone who lives on this planet.
Correct. And maybe I think Kenneth looks like he wants to come in on that. And before I ask you the same question, I want to just take what he has said about looking at it globally, or rather the planet. So, the quote that I gave earlier said we are only one planet. And certainly we have to look at the planet holistically, right? But is it not important that we also look at the context of Namibia specifically in view of, and so our view has always been, should we look inward out rather than outward in? So what we're asking really is, should we consider the values and ideals that have been pushed down upon us and take them as gospel, or should we look inward out and then and proceed from that premise? That's actually what we'd like to know.
Thank you. I actually wanted to respond on that.
Yeah.
When it comes to Namibia, like he said, this climate change is a global problem. And Namibia, as much as we are a small country, we are also a part of that globe and part of that global problem. But I want to come to that concept of this ESG. I think that concept is not foreign to Namibia. If you look at our constitution, there is a provision in the constitution that talks about sustainable use of natural resources, living and non-living resources. And I think that provision talks to the principles of ESG. And we can simply say that maybe our leaders were visionary and forward-looking when they come up with those provisions. And these international principles are basically speaking to those provisions. So we have, long time ago at independence, domesticated these ideas, and we have been, through this policy framework, practicing what these ESG principles wants to achieve. I think with the ESG now, it's not my field of expertise, but the way I understand it is that it is more the investor sort of driving that, that they want to make sure that their investments are environmentally friendly and it's not having negative impacts on the people and on the society. So now the investors have maybe taken up that role, but when it comes to Namibia, then our leaders have already foresee that we need that to sustain and have a sustainable development for Namibia.
Fabian, what's your take on that?
Yeah, my view is pretty much along the views, alongside the views shared. I think two things from my side really to emphasize, and it will probably just summarize one or 2 points made earlier. I think the first thing we need to take note of is that, if you look at the logic of climate physics is very remorseless. So geographically, it doesn't discriminate whether you're a small country or a big country, whether you're north or south. So that logic is very remorseless.
Yeah.
And then I think fundamentally the consequences as a starting point are very unfair.
Yeah.
So those two things are almost a departing point for us, and it, in my view, shapes how you should approach it. The fact that the logic it doesn't care, okay? And then secondly, that it is fundamentally unfair that, the consequences are felt in places and in societies that in most instances cannot help themselves. And as a result, I think you asked about inwards or outward looking.
Yeah.
And as a result, I think it's actually, and it sounds cliched, but it's important that you keep alternating between the two.
Yeah.
You have to look inwards, you have to look outwards. for the two reasons that you never know. You could be in a fortunate position today, and in 150 years' time, you could be worse off. I think the consequences are very unfair in the sense that geographically it could affect somebody who had absolutely no participation in it. But I think that's not so the key point here. For me, it's the generational effect. I mean, I intentionally mentioned you could be fine today. In 150 years' time, you could be worse off. So that generational effect for me is actually ever more so pressing. So you have to alternate between the two. And I think the focus must just be that you think you've done the best you can from your side.
And so that we've done, and I think that the conversation really is that we've done the best for Namibia first, and then in the global context. Because if we can't preserve Namibia, clearly, we also contributing to the detriment of the rest of the planet, isn't it? So I like what you said about the generations, and I think that in our conversation that should also be like a underpinning factor. Because, yes, correctly, Article 95, sub-Article 12, talks about what you've just quoted, that our, predecessors have thought about that already at independence, preserving and conserving the environment and ways of doing that and so on. And when I'm asking about that disproportionate and unfair responsibilities and costs that are associated with the requirements from the North, I actually come to this next question where Namibia was really one of the first countries. In fact, the website for the Ministry of Environment says that it is the first country to embed the protection of environment in the Constitution, in that Article 95 that I quoted, and has incrementally placed almost half its land under some form of environmental protection. We've done that well, I think, in the past, until now that we have this conversation. As a six-fold carbon sink, in other words, we absorb 6 times more carbon than we emit. Is it fair and realistic that we commit, as we have done in COP27 and 26 and 27, that we commit to reducing our carbon emissions by 91% by 2030? And of course, I take into cognizance the last comment that you made, but is it a fair requirement, and is it even a fair thing to have committed to? Kenneth?
I think that's a very complex question, because there is nothing fair in life. So Namibia, as much, I like the response or earlier contribution by Fabian that says about it does not really matter where you are. This climate change is a big challenge, and if we continue to emit carbon, then we are going to see the problems that the climate change projections and the models are projecting. They project that we have just 1 degree or 1.5 degree increase in temperatures will have consequences for Namibia. Most of Namibia will become much drier. Even the northern parts of Namibia, where we have about 40 to 50% of our population, where they practice rain-fed agriculture, that part will become much smaller. Most of Namibia will not be suitable for cattle production, for instance. So if you consider all those facts and the fact that majority of Namibians depend on primary production, rain-fed agriculture or agricultural-based activities, it has got, going 150 years from now, it has got big implications for Namibia. And how do we change our mindsets? We need big and ambitious commitments. So from that perspective, the next question you asked was whether this was realistic. I don't know. We have to wait and see if it is realistic, but we need those big and bold ambitions to change our mindset about climate change and what it means for us. Because if you look at it now, every now and then we've got either good rainfall years when we are even flooded, we have to relocate families. Some years, no rain, and we have to provide drought relief, food for people. How long should we carry on with that? So when I say we, I mean Namibia, when we make those bold global commitments, it should translate into policy frameworks, policies, and changing the mindsets and attitudes of everyone, so that we can see this is how Namibia would look like under climate change scenario. How prepared are we for this? And then by 2030, we are supposed to be an industrialized country. That's our vision, and we are all working towards that. And by that time, if we are industrialized, we are supposed to be, or we should be, economically advanced, which means we should be able to invest in technologies that can reduce carbon emissions. So if you don't make these bold commitments or global commitments, there's nothing forcing you towards working towards those objectives. So from that perspective, I would say it's a fair approach to make those global commitments, because you are Namibia, as much as we are a net or a sink for carbon, we also are affected by the impacts of climate change.
So when you consider that answer, the same question, it's actually, for me, I'm thinking as you're talking, and I'm not an expert, you are the experts.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking as you're talking, whether the 91% reduction should have been 91% or anything less. Was that a realistic number to place? Was it even empirically evidence-based? Or was it just, thumbs up, 91%, we'll get there? And remember, if I've read well, we only contribute to 0.01 or something percent of emission currently. I could be wrong. Please put that into context for me. And making a 91% commitment, is that something that, as bold as it is, how realistic should your boldness be? It's like talking risk averse or being, what do you call it, when you are being prudent in you are risky, but you're also being prudent about it. Can you draw that balance between the two? You know what I mean, Fabian?
Yeah, I think in summary, I almost have to say that my view might be slightly contrary.
And that's fine.
I think, firstly, let's start with fairness. I mean, my view on that, it's very straightforward. It shouldn't be a debate whether it's fair or not.
Okay.
I mean, is it fair to, are we saying, is it fair to Namibia? Because remember, these nationally determined commitments, I think they're called NDCs.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of the phrase is, nobody's holding a gun to your head when you're putting those up. Yeah. So it's really up to you to determine what that is. Now, to put something forward and later say it wasn't fair, I mean, for me, that's just, it's not logical. So for me, the question about fairness, I really think the whole approach sort of from the international bodies was right. I mean, it's to allow people to commit themselves. And I think there's even various categories of those commitments. Okay, so it's really, to a large degree, I view it as being voluntary. So the issue about whether it's fair or not, in my view, I really think it's the wrong debate to have.
Okay.
Is it realistic?
Realistic.
And I actually remember, I think in March, at the NICG conference, I was asked the same question, and I think I didn't really hold back. I thought it was a bit absurd, and I'm going to use the same word. And the reason I say that is, I mean, if you look at it, initially in 2015, the commitment we made was to reduce it by 89%. Now, this is 89% from your business as usual scenario. Okay, and I hear the view shared by Kenneth about being bold and ambitious, but I'm actually going to make a very maybe flimsy analogy, but I think it drives the point home. I've got a 6-year-old son, and every now and then I like to challenge him. You kind of say, can you jump and touch that object? But it gets to a point where he wouldn't even try and jump if your target is unrealistic.
Yeah.
And I really view that 91% as being unrealistic, because if you cast your mind back, 2015, 2030, it's a 15-year window. To reduce it by 91%, well, 89 initially, when you had 15 years to go, And then I think in 2018 we said, 91. I really think that is stretched. And the fact is, it goes back to my earlier point about fairness. Nobody really kind of sort of subjected you to choosing a number that's ambitious. I understand, big, hairy, audacious goals are great, but I think there's a limit at which point, to go back to the analogy of my son, there's a limit at which point they kind of just won't even try. And I really think this is one of the cases where I think we could have been realistic. We're in 2023, less than 7 years to go. Will we get there? I'm not sure. I hope even if we don't get there, we get very close. Then at least maybe I'm proved wrong. What you don't want is, come measurement point, you failed miserably.
Exactly.
What it does is you don't instill confidence in your own nation. But more importantly, I think for me, what is important is, that there's quite a huge demand for investors globally to commit to certain countries and look at them. And if investors realize that some of these targets are not realistic, I think that might have a negative consequence to it. So I think in summary, really, I think fairness is not a big deal for me.
Sure,
but is it realistic? I have to say, I think it is not. And I'm very keenly waiting for 2030 to see how we will punch against that 91. That's my view.
Certainly, go ahead.
Two short contributions to that. There are two things that concerns me when we look at the climate subject. One is that we forget that there's a lot of assumptions. Even everything we discuss is mostly modeled stuff that had put in a lot of opinions, assumptions. To do a proper climate calculation, you need about 30 years minimum.
Okay.
That's according to those who are in charge for global standards. But what I can tell you from the modeling side of things, it is really a lot of assumptions. What you see today can easily be different tomorrow. But obviously you need a collective agreement to adjust it so that it's then adjusted for everyone. That's one. The other thing is, can
I interrupt you on that one?
Yes,
because
yes.
I might just forget. I was talking about calculated risks. Basically, when I said risk averse, that was the wrong term, calculated risk.
Okay.
And when you tell me about assumptions, it leaves me wondering whether we're just making blanket assumptions without having calculated the costs associated to these assumptions that we're making. You mentioned the 30 years. Of probably that empirical studies that need to be done and so on. But what have we been doing in the past 30 years? Have we at all considered any futuristic events and so on? I'm trying to get us to also contextualize it in the sense that we can't make a blanket statement where we can't be held accountable for certain things.
Correct.
Certainly, when we make a decision, there's an end goal to it. And there must be variations. Even when there's a little change tomorrow, a big, huge change, there is something. He's a banker, so you might have to help me here. There's not a buffer, but there's a provision that you have made for that assumption that you already also assume that there could be a deviation from the norm. Have we not considered this? But please consider this in your following
I think
comments.
those who were in charge of whatever was discussed, let's say in Paris, had looked at some of those grey areas and so on. But where I was going to is since I'm sort of not forced, but I have to speak to the local context. What concerns me most in the case of Namibia, when you go to pharmacy, mostly if it's not something small, you would have a prescription letter from a doctor that says, please give him this and that and that. And that doctor should have done proper work in terms of checks, diagnosis and whatever have you, so that he doesn't prescribe wrong medication that would, instead of getting you better, would kill you. I'm getting to this point because My worry with Namibia, to be specific, everyone will tell you it's the driest country in the sub-Saharan Africa. Whether that is by numbers, facts, or it's just how we understand it, it's obviously something subjective. But my worry is those projections that we see about climate, the 91% that we need to get to and so on, are all somehow states and projections that are given to us. I'm saying this because myself specifically and those I work with, we struggled, for instance, to get a doctor. I'm talking about a medical doctor for climate in this country, right? Before we get to adaptation mitigation, which is me going to the pharmacy to get medicine. Okay. Who can tell me by numbers, by projections, by modeling in this country, this is what is happening at the local context? Then we can say, okay, so where do we go get money? Because for as long as we can't ignore the world part, that is where I was coming from, because for as long as we are not able to separate money, people, money in terms of profit, and planet in terms of independence, that we can actually carry those three on our own, we can also just ignore what people are saying in Paris, unfortunately. Because
so you're saying that Fabian said clearly there is no gun held to us that coerces us to make a commitment. You are asked to make a commitment, and you come up with this huge, ambitious digit. Is it so we can attract the investors? Because I hear you that we are not doing this alone. Certainly, there's some of these ideals are imposed by investors.
What pains me, if I can use that word, is that we want to be the survivalist and someone who must have a good lifestyle, right? That is the world of climate change. There are those who are doing it for a lifestyle. They want to change from, say, fossil fuels to something smart, clean. And there are those who need, as an example, fossil fuels to survive. We are not clear on, and I sometimes tell my friends, perhaps we are getting also lost in the English words. We are not so clear in terms of what defines climate change for us at the local context, so that we go to the world with our definition and see if it fits in how they define it. And if it doesn't fit, how do we take our people there and the portion of the planet which is ours to them, and then ask for their money if that's the case, if that's what we want. Otherwise, why are we not doing things here, right? And that's really my side of the story, is to say it's not clear. These things are not clear to us, Vinci. I will be very, very honest with you. When you speak about should we be concerned about reducing emissions, and someone has given us a number by what does it mean, even in terms of the people we have here? Right? Can they afford to drop? And that maybe answers your question as well. Can we afford to go green? Can we do it? At what cost? And what does it mean in terms of the science? And my worry, lastly, is that we don't have the doctors to tell us how sick we are and what kind of medication we actually need. We run to Paris and all these green funds to ask for them to pay for pharmacy medication, but we don't have local doctors who are telling us this is actually your sickness. It's someone else, in my opinion, telling us that you are sick. And for me, that doesn't work quite well.
Kenneth, what do you say about that? That's an interesting, we need to sort of talk about that a little bit more, because it really does touch on my first question, how realistic it is that we just adopt from the northern side whatever is being asked without looking contextually, locally, what is happening here. So I think that really does start to speak to that question. But that's an important thing. What do you think about it?
No, it's true that we have capacity gaps when it comes to climate scientists, if I can put it that way. We need to train our own people in the field of climate change. But then at least when these global negotiations are being held, the information is drawn from the expertise, and Namibia also participate in those processes. There is an international panel on climate change consisting of scientists drawn from different parts of the world. I think our neighbor South Africa is also an active player. They have also.
A player?
I'm not so sure in terms of contribution of data that goes into this climate change modeling, but like you said, it's based on assumptions, but then also based on the quality of data that goes into these models. These are long-term data sets that are used to model what the climate change trajectory will be if we keep on emitting at a certain levels. That's why those global or bold commitments are made, because the idea is to keep the temperature around certain degrees, to keep it below that 1.5 degrees increase. Because if it goes beyond that, then it will be tipping points for many countries, especially us in the southern African region. In Namibia, we've got the Kalahari Desert, if you want to call it that way, to our east, and then we've got the Atlantic coast to our west, and the Namib Desert. It already influences our rainfall. And we were saying, if you're not really sure if we are indeed the driest country, we are indeed the driest country south of the Sahara. There is data available on that. Our average rainfall is at the coast, it's 0 millimeters per annum to just about 600, 700 in Zambezi, which is the highest. So we are an arid country. The northeastern parts are semi-arid. So those are the facts. And because of our geographical location and how we are impacted by the global circulations, we have this system where rainfall is also highly variable. So we have climate change. On top of that, we've got high rainfall variability. Some years you get good rainfall, some years you get bad rain. And there are cycles, some wet cycles. So every 10 years there is like a wet cycle. But now what we are seeing more is the more frequent droughts. So in the past you'll have like 8 to 10 years of good rainfall, followed by 2, 3, 4 years of dry spell, followed by another wet cycle. But now we are seeing frequent dry spells. So which means something in the global circulation systems must be changing to have that effect. And then unfortunately, because of our socioeconomic states of development, we become vulnerable. We are talking about high unemployment rates in the country. We are talking about maybe about half of the population that is rural. So when you are rural, you depend on the primary sources like the natural resources. Most of them dependent on the rainfall. So the country becomes very vulnerable. So as a national leader or as a government, you have to then take up space in these discussions to bring about a positive change and then to make your voice heard. Because like Fabian put it, we are not responsible for these carbon emissions. We are still trying to develop. And these carbon emissions have been, maybe since the Industrial Revolution, has been coming since then. Now, we cannot go and maybe impact on the carbon emissions so much, but there is something that we can do. It's out of our control, but we have to somehow adapt to these global changes. We may not have the resources. How do we adapt to these global changes? And that's where the global partnerships comes into play to make such resources available to countries like Namibia, who are not the contributors, but who are mostly negatively affected by this global change. So it becomes really a tricky business, because you look at the science behind climate change. While you're discussing the science, you are seeing the reality on the ground. There's impact. While you're trying to build capacity of your scientists to really test that if there's climate change or not, what you're seeing is that your society, your livelihoods, everything is impacted negatively. So one has to draw somewhere a line to say, yes, as much as we push for our own scientists and capacity development, in Namibia it's a big problem to invest in science. I can boldly say that here.
Why is that?
We don't invest in science. Maybe we've got so much competing needs to provide schools, needs for medicine, health, clinics, and so on. So we invest a little in science and scientific development, research and development. So as much as we are going to negotiate for more resources, we must also use our resources to invest in this field so that we can also confidently say, yes, this is what's going to happen, localize those global modeling to Namibian scenario, make some scenarios and say this is what is going to happen, and hear that from our own people.
And currently we can't hear it from our own people because you said we don't have the capacity per se, right? And maybe Fabian can help me on that. But what I want to say is that last week in this Fireplace conversations, we're speaking about profit particularly, and the economists around the table were actually convinced that when we don't have the resources, we have the money, for instance, to bring in the resources to give us the proper advice that we need so that we don't have to look 30 years back and say we've made a mistake, so that we can make calculated risk actually, or take calculated risk rather.
And I think they're probably right. I have to admit I didn't follow those series, or I didn't hear that specific conversation. But listening to what you said, I think they're right, and I think Kenneth touched on it. You have to, and that's why my view around sort of fairness and unfairness was very categorical. I think you have to work as partners in this. It's a global problem we have, and you have to leverage whatever strength you have. What you don't have, you have to source elsewhere. So the partnerships are correct. So in some instances, you can actually spend the resources to bring in the guidance and the necessary skills where needed. The reason I say that, and it's almost, if you think about it, it's almost not a very nationalistic approach and so on. But the reason I say that is we don't have much time. I mean, to be a fully qualified climate scientist, I mean, you mentioned 30 years to see long-term trends and so forth. We can't wait for a generation to have those people. So I think it goes back to my point. I think you need to realistically assess your strengths, realistically assess what you can contribute, firstly for Namibia, but largely to the world. Hence, that national commitment that you make must be realistic. And where you see that you don't have the skills and you've got gaps, you have to bring in partnerships. And for me, when you make very realistic commitments, comments, or statements, partners value you more. Because otherwise you kind of, it's almost like trying to be the hero. So I really think to Kenneth's point, partnerships are critical, but I think the skills, in my view, it is important in the long term, we have to build it, but that shouldn't be a hindrance to what we're trying to achieve. I think through the partnerships, the right strategic partnerships, I mean, that's almost a discussion for another day, how you ensure that they are fair, the actual partnerships, but you have to make sure that you form those and act quickly, because the one thing I think that we really don't have is the time. And again, for me, that 91% by 2030, you and I will probably be sitting somewhere, and then all of us can see how we clocked against that. And if we're going to wait for somebody or 5 Namibians to earn PhDs in climate science, that's 7 years from now. Their work will start in 2030. By then, we'll be measuring the 91%.
So
One line.
okay.
You see, this is why I'm saying we need to, I fully agree with you, but I think we need to decide. This is where I was going with perhaps getting lost in the English language as well, because you can't claim that the Northern Hemisphere is the problem
Okay.
and also want to work with them in certain areas when it matters the most to you. What I mean is, it's like saying, how do I put it in a way that it's a bit more clear? So it's basically like saying you are the problem. Okay, so you brought me all these issues, but the views and the extent of those issues must still come from you, if that makes sense. So we want to hear from the Northern Hemisphere that we are in trouble because of climate change, and they created it. So now they must just give us funds and tell us how to mitigate it up to a certain percentage.
So if you've created a problem, should you not have the accountability to solve it? Or the responsibility to solve it?
You should, but my point here is if you created the problem, you shouldn't be the one to tell whoever is suffering from that problem that this is the extent of the problem, because then your facts and information is questionable. This is where I was saying, when you have strong ground people, they can scrutinize that information and get you to a more closer and realistic number that you can handle given your local conditions as well. Because we can speak about turning Namibia into a green hub by when. But I traveled this country to almost every village, all 14 regions. I can tell you some of the things don't make sense. Because people are not worried about, putting... they are not worried about not putting petrol in the car.
Yeah.
They are worried about other things that I don't want to mention here. But I think somehow that paints my point. Is really to say, let's decide. Do we want the same people we are blaming? Look, there was an example given in a meeting about climate in France recently. This gentleman is saying, if your head is in a microwave and your feet are in a freezer, the body temperature is supposed to balance out, but you will still die. So this thing of working with averages, I'm poor, support me, you are rich, support, it doesn't always work.
Okay.
We need to find our feet. Are you going to be in the freezer or are you going to be in the microwave? Because the balancing doesn't always work. And that's my opinion. Remember when we started, I said I'm going to share what I believe in as the only name on the list, according to Jim Rohn. So I hope you...
No, and that's fine. Yeah. We appreciate that. Yeah. I like that we should have different views, except that the final view should obviously, and I'll ask you for your final remarks, but by the time we get to that, we should be able to give way forward in constructively that we can use, because even when we cannot balance and we cannot create the balance that you're talking about, we should come to a place where we can find solutions, whether it's out of balance or in balance, but there should be a place where we find a solution. That's what we're trying to do. Yes. While we are on here, and I don't want to detract from or digress from my own questions, but there's a question that relates to what we've been talking about, where we are being asked by Rodney from the viewers, what are climate plans to welcome carbon-intensive industries like oil and natural gas or phosphate, and are we ready? And I think that was going to be the last question that I was going to ask, but we've now been asked, and I think it's just fair that we entertain our viewers. Fabian, you sound ready for this one.
No, I'll have a step at it, and then the others can build on it. If I understand, the question correctly, it's really the question around sort of the green economy versus sort of the black or dark economy. And again, I generally don't like, approaching things in a very polarized manner or binary manner, in the sense that, it's not, that Namibia adapts green only, or we remain sort of a gray sort of industry. There's going to be various shades of green. There's going to be various shades of gray. And I think one has to keep that in mind. We are going to transition into green. I mean, there's absolutely no chance that, we can wake up tomorrow and it's green. I don't think so. So the question around, oil and gas and so forth, for me, in my view, is quite clear. I think it should be about the broader economy at large. If there is an industry that allows us to get to the green economy, you use that to transition into green. I always look at, when you have to look at natural resources, you have to use them in the most optimal way. And Namibia is actually an interesting one. We seem to have been given too much because we've got everything.
Yeah.
And I think for us, the key is to really analyze that portfolio of what we have and make the correct strategic choices as to what our journey is going to be. I mean, the last thing you want to do, and I'm not sure if there's a question like that coming, but the last thing you want to do is where you say, well, okay, we've got all, industries related to oil and gas, and you say, but we're not going to touch it. And fast forward 50 years from now, you regret not having done it. I think it's important to do the right work and choose the path to transitioning. It's important that you have a goal to transition, but you have to utilize whatever resources has been availed to you. And it touches a little bit to the earlier comments about, do we perhaps sometimes feel external pressure to commit to certain numbers? My understanding to that is really that when it's nationally determined, you come up with the numbers. So my view is that I think there is space within Namibia, in fact within the continent, to utilize some of the legacy fuel sources as a vehicle to transition into the more sort of greener versions. But the key and sort of final point here for me is, we need to keep in mind there's going to be various sort of forms of green before you get to deep green. There's going to be various forms of sort of gray. It's not one or the other. It's not binary. Yeah.
And the conversation, it sounds like an hour is a long time, but it always comes to an end so swiftly. And it's painful and always, but we literally have a few minutes to round up. It was really getting interesting, and I like the points that you've started to make. It's the strategies that we're actually talking about. And I think in a line or two, what should we do with these plans? Have we started making the plans? And to that question that was asked by our viewer, have we started making plans, and can I have that in 2 lines or so before I get to this cardinal question that we really have to address before we end tonight? Just in 2 lines, because I don't have more time.
I think these are all emerging or new developments for which I think Namibia is setting itself ready to address. So I think the time is right now to get those plans in place. Yeah.
My view is that the unfortunate thing is that you can only, with all the beautiful plans you have, if you don't have the P, which is profit, if you don't have cash somewhere that needs to go somewhere, everything is almost impossible. So, and the world that we are begging now to support us to survive these climatic conditions has gotten, to be quite honest with you, has gotten its money from the same resources that we are being advised to avoid at all cost. In 2006, America was importing fuel from all over the world. 2013, they have guys called frackers. 2013, they were exporting, right? And since then, everyone wants to take a selfie in America. and the like. So what I'm saying is, without that P, without us sorting out ourselves around the P of profit locally, we will always be failing to implement whatever else we want to do, be it green, be it yellow, blue, it doesn't matter. And if we have such resources, let's find the balance, like he was advising us to do it, and make sure that we get as much as possible to help us not to have issues implementing what is right for the future.
And I think generally speaking, what you've mentioned earlier about, the plans and policies that should be in place, I think we should emphasize that. And obviously your ministry, alongside Ministry of Mines and Energy and all the bodies that are involved, should work really hard on getting these policies in place, some institutions in place. This is the last question that I want each of you to touch on, but really briefly. We've been lauded as the country that has, has embedded environmental ideals into the Constitution. But over the years, as a country where it has had a thriving environment, but recently with the reports and, the Stamford uranium examples, the Kavango drilling, the Omaruru and Uis lithium issues, where suspiciously quick environmental clearance certificates have been issued and so on. And all the things, you remember the article that between us we shared yesterday, and all the stories that I said about Africon and the drilling that has now stopped and that they're bankrupt, and all the impacts that it has on the society in terms of employment, and then just the environment itself in terms of depletion and so on. What can we do better? Now the story doesn't sound as laudable as it did in the past. What can we do to sort of restore that position and retain it for the years to come?
Yeah, my view on that is, and actually before I get to that last point on the previous question, I think, are there plans there? I think yes. I think we are right on track. Yeah. We just need the velocity.
Okay.
I don't think we're doing things quick enough. But onto your question, I think my view on that is we have to remember the track record that you spoke about. I think track means you're looking back.
Yeah.
I think that we built that up over a different era. I think we're into new territory now.
Yeah.
In my view, the issues around Okavango, the Stamford, Omaruru, I think we may be making them a lot bigger than they really are. I think the important part is I really think they present us with a great opportunity to test our systems. And by that, I really mean sort of our legal frameworks, the current regulations that are in place, the interactions between the various ministries. It's a great opportunity for us. And I actually have got great hope that, the institutions are strong enough. I think a lot of these areas that you've mentioned, I won't mention the companies, I think there's, a lot of them are in some form of, sort of following a judicial process.
Yeah.
And for me, that is great news. It's actually a great opportunity for us to test how strong we are, and where we falter, we must strengthen. My view is, it's great to reflect on your checkered past and the history you had and great records you've built up. But you get to a situation where that gets really challenged. And we shouldn't just, for the sake of keeping a record, make certain decisions. I think we should ensure that, our institutions and our processes that we've got in place are strong, because that's what will attract investment.
I think so. And before you come in that African case, I think the communities actually challenged the issuance of the clearance certificate and so on, and the court did not welcome that, and certainly to have it reviewed would cost a lot of money for those communities and for that environment. So while I hear you, I think even the lawmakers, the policymakers, the law enforcers, the judicial system should take cognizance of the impacts of the decisions that we're making for a quick buck, but for the long-term impact that it would have on our people. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I actually think we are doing way better than we did in the past.
Okay.
Unless if you don't have, speaking from mining, you don't have the history of mining in this country. I think environmentally we are doing quite well now. What we are not realizing is just that the education level, not formal education, but access to information, people understanding that someone must do environmental work before you start, that has gotten to almost every Namibian now.
Okay.
Back then you could show up, I'm speaking now like an old man, but you could show up basically in a community and people will accept everything you are saying because it's development. They don't have questions around how are you going to protect water, the case of Stamprit and so on and so on. But it's really an awoken society. But nothing has changed. We are doing better. I can give you a history of many areas that are disturbed by historical work, and we got that record of good environmental management.
Okay.
So we are doing quite well. What we are not picking up, my view, is that society is really also perhaps pointing to a question of, but who owns what is happening in my area? Because I can promise you, if it's my brother here who is from that village versus my brother here who has to fly in, the conversation is different.
Okay.
And therefore the reaction is also, I think, and I like it because society is promoting or is forcing us to say, if you are going to damage my environment, can it be that at least the benefits, half of them are going to us and our people? But otherwise, I'm in that space almost every day. There is really not much that has changed other than the fact that people are just all of a sudden interested in this subject.
Which is probably good. Final word,
Yes, no,
and then we're unfortunately out of time.
Yes, I want to agree with my colleagues here. We've got institutions and systems in place to ensure environmental sustainability. Even with those entities that you mentioned, they went through a rigorous sort of environmental assessment process. And the law provides for anybody who is aggrieved, who is not happy, to go to the Minister of Environment and appeal. And if you are not happy with the response from the minister, then you can go the route of the court and to challenge that decision. But then I want to just put to rest the statement you made that these clearance certificates were suspiciously issued so fast. One needs to put time frame to that. There is a 3 to 6 months period for reviewing EIAs, and it's not one person that reviews the environmental impact assessments. It goes through a system before the environmental commissioner gives the clearance certificate. So I would call on Namibians to have faith in these systems and have confidence in these systems, and if they think the system is not working for them, then there are provisions that they can follow. We can look at the example of the Stamprit aquifer, where the minister responsible for water affairs says stop, which means that they have acquainted themselves with the issues. As a competent authority, they came in and they had to put their feet down. So those are kind of systems that we have in place to protect our environment, because there's a saying that the environment and the resources, it's what we borrow from our children. So it's from the future generations that we borrow this. So we have to look after this resource, and that's what that governance framework is providing for.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for giving us your time. 1 hour is really always short. This was a very in-depth, sort of a deep conversation, and I wish that the last part of it, that we could have had another hour to discuss it even more, because we do need to have this conversation around our fireplaces in Namibia. And I think the conversation should continue, even if it's not on this platform. It should continue on different platforms, especially to place platforms where it matters the most with the decision makers and the people who are planning for things to eventuate in these areas. So thank you for joining us tonight on Fireplace Conversations. It was good to have you. We conclude our series on the governance of natural resources, and we look forward to tackling issues that are more contemporary, even in other areas. And look forward to having you next week, Thursday, again, 6 p.m. Fireplace Conversations. Good night.